Consider yourself dragged.
Is that your?
That's
your
my commercial
radio voice. I love it. That actually is a really good commercial radio voice.
It's in the mornings.
I should know. It was good.
It's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Dankman. And this week's Sound Politics is more like Law and Order, local government edition.
Do we have the music? Did someone?
Dun, dun.
Hans. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Well, we're talking about legal news, so it's very appropriate. We're talking about electing lawyers, and weirdly, there's a lot of news about lawyers electing them, prosecutors, etc.
And who's representing who? First up, Scott, you have an update about this legal saga involving the King County Assessor, John Wilson. We covered it last week, but dang it if this guy doesn't keep making headlines. So what's going on?
We did not get into the details of the arrest last week. I think I said something like he was arrested outside his ex-fiance's home. I got to see the police report, and apparently he'd been spotted by her neighbors, according to her. She called the police. They came. While they were taking the police report, he pulled up again.
This is wild.
He had allegedly been around the corner at Daniel's Broiler. He had posted about it on Facebook. He shows up again later, and the police officer's like, what? He quickly turns around in his car.
Reverse, yeah.
The cop pulls him over and says, there's a restraining order against you regarding this residence. And he said he was in the neighborhood to look at buying a houseboat. So... he got out of jail about 24 hours later, roughly. There have been no charges filed yet.
But that's not a closed
case, closed.
Right? Like, they're still looking.
Yeah, the Snohomish County prosecutor is investigating and gathering all the evidence, and they say they should have a charging decision. Well, they don't really have a timeline yet.
And why is Snohomish County making that decision? Like, why is it the Snohomish County prosecutor? This is King County stuff.
Great question. This gets right at what we're talking about today. King County prosecutor asked the Snohomish County prosecutor to take it because King County prosecutor normally would act as the lawyer for the assessor's office, right? John Arthur Wilson is the county assessor. So in civil litigation matters, his lawyer is the King County prosecutor. So they asked Snohomish County to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest. And
basically because he's like a colleague of Lisa Mannion.
Sure. They just want to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, right? So here is what I think is interesting about that and what we're talking about today. When you're a person, you get to pick your lawyer if you can afford one. When you're a local government, at least around here, your lawyer is elected. King County prosecutor is. That's Lisa Mannion. You just mentioned her. So is Snohomish County.
Yeah, the voters pick your lawyer ultimately. And sometimes people who actually run those counties or run offices in those counties, they're not big fans of having that choice being taken away from them. I'm thinking about what's happening in Pierce County right now, where the right-wing sheriff, Keith Swank, wants to sign a deal with ICE, immigration enforcement, that would allow his deputies to help the Trump administration deport undocumented immigrants that come through the jails. His lawyer, Sheriff Swank's lawyer, by statute, that would be Pierce County prosecutor Mary Robnett. She told him that is illegal under Washington sanctuary law and the county charter, that cooperation. So Swank told Robnett he does not trust her. He then went to go get a private attorney of his own instead.
I read about this. So our friend of the pod, Jim Bruner, wrote about this.
Shout out to Bruner, yeah.
Shout out to Jim. He wrote about this in the Seattle Times this week. So Robnett, the prosecutor, went to court and won, and a judge told Swank, you cannot hire your own lawyer.
Yeah, not when the prosecutor is there and ready to represent you. So now you have the elected sheriff in Pierce County openly battling with the county executive and its prosecutor, because ultimately the reason he wants his own lawyer is because he doesn't want to follow what the county executive says. He wants to be able to make his own deals with ICE. Now he has a new attorney assigned who is a former San Juan County prosecutor, but Sheriff Swank says he doesn't want that attorney. And Swank's private attorney has promised to sue Pierce County for her constitutional rights being violated.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a lot, Scott, it's a lot. Meanwhile, Swank is traveling to D.C. to meet with Pam Bondi, hoping that the Trump administration DOJ steps in here and, maybe does what they did with L.A., which is sue them over the sanctuary jurisdiction stuff. It's a mess.
It is. And this is not the biggest part of it, but there is one little detail that jumped out at me. My favorite part of that story is that Pierce County prosecutor Mary Robnett told Sheriff Swank in an email in April, you can consult another lawyer, quote, at your own peril. And Swank wrote back, you are my peril. It's so dramatic.
It's very, so, there's no trust there. Like more drama from this guy who, if you remember, when we covered this last year, he was told by God, he says, to run for sheriff while he was in the hot tub. There has also been this disciplinary report that's come out since he's been elected from Seattle Police. He was at the Seattle Police Department for decades. He had made social media posts disparaging Black people and defending Jan 6th. And the Seattle Police record, the disciplinary report says if he had not retired, he would have been fired because of the damage done to the department.
Yeah. And now he's apparently asking ChatGPT for legal advice, and it's telling him he was right. So, yeah. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today, right? We're actually here to talk about an election in Seattle. Seattle is another place where this complicated intersection of elections and the law and the questions of when and who to prosecute or not is playing out, right? Because Seattle voters are going to vote on city attorney in less than a month. That's kind of like the county prosecutor, but different. And you're going to get into that in a minute here. Seattle has a choice of whether to stay the course or go with someone new for their city attorney. And this race is so interesting because even though the position of city attorney is nonpartisan, I think party politics could end up being a decisive factor in this race. Do you think so?
Yeah, and I sat down with KUOW's Amy Radel to talk about this. It's the prosecutor's race in Seattle. 4 years ago, liberal Seattle did this thing that really made the rest of the country sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
Bluest of the blue, Seattle elected a Republican as city attorney. And now that Republican, Ann Davison, is running for re-election on the August 5th primary ballot. And the big difference is, from 4 years ago, there is now a Republican in the White House who a lot of Seattleites really hate. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Amy Radel, who covers law and justice for KUOW. You had a chance to sit down with Ann Davison, the current city attorney, and we're going to get to your conversation in just a moment. Let's remind listeners, though, how she first came into this office, because that was a really interesting race, especially for city attorney, which, sometimes gets overlooked. What was the story of the 2021 election?
Yeah, it started out looking pretty sleepy. We had a longtime city attorney, Pete Holmes. He was seeking a fourth term. No one in the political establishment thought to challenge him, but he attracted two opponents. They didn't have a lot of experience, but they really tapped into voters' concerns. Nicole Thomas Kennedy was a former public defender who wanted to continue that 2020 conversation about defunding police and jails. Ann Davison was a Republican who said Democrats weren't addressing things in Seattle like open-air drug use and disorder. So Pete Holmes lost in the primary. And then in the general, we had Nicole Thomas Kennedy's vitriolic tweets from 2020 that were reported. She called for property destruction. She called police pigs and serial killers. And then Davison won in November, and I think was seen as a pretty unknown quantity at that point.
I do remember, even though I was currently living in Los Angeles when this election happened, I was working at a NPR station down there, how much this election was lighting up social media feeds. It was kind of the talk of the 2021 for my Seattle contacts. And, Ann Davison then comes into office. She's vowed to crack down on disorder. She said that this city wasn't prosecuting enough misdemeanors, Amy. The city doesn't prosecute felony cases. That's for the county. But she was looking at things like misdemeanors, like shoplifting. She thought the city should prosecute more often. Now, she's held that city attorney position for almost a full term. How does she feel about the goal to prosecute more now?
She says that she feels like she's struck the right balance. One area that she focused on was the people that her office called them high utilizers. And these were a list of over 100 people who had generated thousands of criminal referrals. And Davison says these low-level crimes, just the volume of them was taking a toll on the city and on businesses, but these people weren't being booked into jail. So she worked with the municipal court and the jail to change that. Now she says some of those people are in jail. Some of them just aren't on her office's radar anymore. And as a result, she says the number of people who are engaged in these repeat frequent offenses is dwindling. And she says that the city feels safer now at the end of her first term.
In these 3.5 years I've been in office has been significant. I think the city has turned. We've shown that safety is important. We're not done, but that's really been kind of the most significant piece for me personally and professionally.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that there's no doubt that we have seen a drop in incidents of violent offenses in the city. I think that, the question is whether voters will say that is because of the policies of Ann Davison or whether that's because of national trends of crime that, seem to be dropping since 2019. Amy, one of the major changes Davison made as city attorney was pulling out of the community court program. So this was a diversion program where people charged with lower level crimes could access services without pleading guilty. And it was controversial at the time, this decision to pull out. How does Davison view that now?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most significant changes that she's made since she took office. And she told me that she stands by that decision. It's one where her opponents certainly differ with her. But Davison says that this model that was run by the Seattle Municipal Court was really flawed because people were sent there for certain offenses automatically.
It was unknown if this was the first referral or 40 referrals. They were auto-routed to community court. So the data showed us it was actually increasing recidivism. People were committing more crime when they went through community court because the message was, we don't really care, you can just do this and we're not going to really bother.
So Davison says that she supports alternatives to prosecution in certain cases, but she wants to review the candidates for these programs, target them for people who are younger, who don't have a lengthy criminal record, who just, maybe just had their first criminal offense. So instead of taking part in that community court, her office is doing its own pre-filing diversion where she says recidivism is lower. So they divert people to several different nonprofits like the organization Choose 180. And then there is also still a mental health court at the municipal court level. And her office does still send cases there, just so that people realize that.
So Davison also pushed for soap and soda zones during her tenure. And these are those stay out of drug areas where people who are charged or convicted of a drug crime aren't allowed to enter. Also the stay out of prostitution zone with similar restrictions for people believed to be engaged in sex work or the sex trade along Aurora Avenue. You asked Ann Davison about whether soap and soda were effective, because we heard a lot of criticisms as this was getting passed through the city council that it would move people around, that it wasn't going to be effective in actually assisting, especially the women who were involved in prostitution on Aurora. What did she say about the effectiveness of these soap and soda zones?
She said that they're really too new. She said that her office is still gearing up to start really using these orders. And she said there's just been a handful of those orders about the keep out of prostitution zone so far.
And so the soap order is slow to be used, but I'm really pleased that our council put that into law from 8 to 1 so we can start to tell those who engage in that type of criminal enterprise, you can't come here. We want to protect women and girls, and we're going to fight against human trafficking in our locations.
And then touching back on community court, Davison also recently introduced an initiative that kind of resurrects one aspect of that program. It's just for people with drug use violations, and those people can avoid charges and instead be referred to municipal court resources, kind of like that community court setup. But to participate, they have to sign one of these stay out of drug area orders. And one of her opponents, Nathan Rouse, is a public defender. He says no defense lawyer would advise their client to sign an order that could lead to future charges in order to access those resources. So he predicts that this process will not be heavily used.
And we're going to hear from more opponents, including Rouse in just a minute. Davison will be in office for at least the next 6 months. We know that. And right now, federal policy has just really been on top of mind for local officials across the country, but especially in blue cities like Seattle. City leaders here are having to make contingency plans for what happens if the White House or the Justice Department goes after their city. The Trump administration has sued Los Angeles already for its sanctuary city policies. Seattle does have similar laws. Did Davison talk about what she was anticipating when it comes to federal action against the city?
Yes, the Justice Department has sued LA, saying the city is obstructing federal immigration enforcement. They've already sued New York and Chicago as well. And Davison said she's definitely bracing for a similar lawsuit and prepared to defend Seattle's ordinance. She says our ordinance complies with federal law. It instructs city staff not to ask someone's immigration status unless it's legally required. This spring, her office also joined a lawsuit led by the city of San Francisco that tries to block Trump's executive order that denies federal funds to these so-called sanctuary cities. And then more recently, she joined a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security for denying funds for, in our case, radiation detection equipment that the city of Seattle was seeking to buy.
Because we are going to be hosting World Cup next year, and it's significant for us to get ready for safety issues for large events like that. And so it's incomprehensible to me why that money would be frozen when that is to be in preparation to prevent potential dangerous activity.
So Davison is running to keep her job. There are 3 challengers. Amy, I want to go through each of them one by one, if that sounds okay to you.
Yeah. I met these 3 opponents at a voters forum in Seward Park recently, and I was struck by how supportive they were of one another, at least at this point. You know, they talked about their differences of their experience, but in a super collegial way. And I asked them to pose together for a photo afterwards. I thought they would just kind of like stand stiffly side by side. And they actually, put their arms around each other. So I thought that was kind of sweet in this current political landscape.
No sharp elbows getting in when they were
not yet.
positioning for that that photo. Okay, let's start with Erica Evans. Who is Erica Evans and what's her platform?
Yeah, Erica Evans is the only challenger with a prosecutor's background in this race. So she worked at the city attorney's office. That was before Davison was there. Erica Evans also worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office, including the Office of Civil Rights. She's Black and says her family struggled with poverty when she was growing up. She grew up in this region. She frames herself as a fairly progressive prosecutor, also supportive of unions. She said her dad is currently a bus driver in Olympia.
And it's time for a change. It's time for someone else that has never been represented in that office before to step up and lead. And I believe I'm that person to serve all of you. So I bring the actual lived and professional experience.
And then she really leaned in to kind of draw a sharp point between herself and Ann Davison, saying that in 2020, Davison very publicly joined the Republican Party. As Evans would say, it's the party of Donald Trump. While months later in 2021, Erica Evans, as a federal prosecutor, was assisting in the cases of local men who were being charged in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol.
Very dramatic contrast being drawn there. Although you just explained how Ann Davison is saying she's going to defend Seattle sanctuary city legislation, things like that. I feel like Davison is giving a strong "I'm not with him" message about Trump. Okay, so moving on to the next challenger on our list here for city attorney, Rory O'Sullivan. Amy, give us the download.
Yeah, Rory O'Sullivan is a legal aid lawyer, so he's kind of coming from assisting people in need more from the civil side. His firm helps people obtain unemployment benefits. He has defended people from foreclosure and eviction. He also helped write and defend the Initiative for Democracy vouchers. So lots of experience on the civil side. And he says he was giving his young son some advice lately about not complaining about things, but seeing what you could do to change them. And he decided that, he felt an echo there. He needed to take his own advice and run for this office. So here's Rory O'Sullivan talking at the campaign event in Seward Park in late June.
I was complaining when Ann Davison shut down community court. I was complaining when she spent all her political capital passing these laws to exclude people from different areas of the city. And I was complaining when she did absolutely nothing to prepare for an administration that we knew was going to do harm to our friends and neighbors.
So he's alluding to those soap and soda orders that we talked about there. And then he says that in terms of these lawsuits, Davison shouldn't just be joining other cities' lawsuits. She should be leading litigation against the Trump administration the way Washington State Attorney General Nick Brown has done.
All right, I'm sensing a theme, and it involves Davison and the Trump administration, from these opponents at least. Let's get to the final candidate who is challenging Davison for this position, Nathan Rouse. We heard from him earlier. Amy, what's his deal?
Yeah, Nathan Rouse has worked in private practice at the firm Davis Wright Tremaine, and he's currently a public defender in King County. So he talked about visiting clients in jail and saying he sees people suffering from neglect there. And while he and Ann Davison both support diversion programs, Nathan Rouse would seek to divert a much higher proportion of cases to keep them out of courts and jail.
I think that we need to not only bring back community court, but place a much larger emphasis on pre-filing diversion. Pre-filing diversion is when, instead of filing charges against someone, you send them directly to a social worker who can provide you access to services.
So Rouse says programs that can get at the root cause of crime should be expanded. And he also echoed the calls from those other candidates for Seattle to lead the way on challenging the Trump administration.
All right, so it's clear Ann Davison's opponents are trying to connect her being a Republican to the Trump administration. They're challenging her to do more to counter the administration's attacks on blue cities. So how is she responding to that, Amy?
She does not want to talk about partisan terms. You know, she says the race for city attorney is nonpartisan and her party affiliation, past or present, is simply, in her words, irrelevant.
I mean, I really do think it's irrelevant. I say the same policies no matter what I've done in all my years of trying to get involved. I've said the same exact policies because I think they're the policies for the moment.
So she describes the Trump administration's efforts to freeze funding for sanctuary cities as incomprehensible and bizarre, but she doesn't call Trump out by name. And even when she became a Republican, she talked about that decision in terms of disagreeing with local Democrats on these issues. So she's always kept her focus local as far as I can see. And whether voters welcome or accept that at such an intensely partisan moment.
Yeah, maybe we'll get some answers here coming up in this primary election. Amy, you know, the municipal election in 2021 was kind of that classic moderate versus progressive Seattle election, but on steroids in some ways. So in the city attorney's race, the moderate candidate was a Republican who wanted to prosecute more misdemeanors. The progressive candidate was a self-described abolitionist who didn't want to prosecute misdemeanors at all. The outgoing city attorney, Pete Holmes, lost in the primary, and when he wished both of his opponents luck, he said, quote, "With a city so ideologically splintered, whoever wins will certainly need it." So the primary is August 5th, less than a month away. What are the bigger picture storylines you're seeing develop here?
Yeah, we just haven't really talked about some of the other races and how they relate to Ann Davison's. I think that her campaign is sort of being tethered to that of City Council President Sarah Nelson in terms of I've seen independent expenditures for and against them that seem to regard them, you know, kind of together. Nelson is seen as a centrist or even, you know, conservative leaning by Seattle standards. She's also running for re-election this year, and they have partnered on a lot of legislation. So they are being treated as kind of a slate, which is interesting. They were both elected in 2021 with a real public safety focus, and we saw that trend continue with those additional city council candidates 2 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see whether voters have a different outlook now that, you know, crime statistics are coming down from their record highs. Seattle police staffing has gotten a bit better, but now we have this overlay of national politics.
Yeah, which throws a really big question mark in there. Amy Radel, a reporter at KUOW, covering politics and government. Thank you for breaking down the city attorney's race in Seattle as it stands right now. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks to Amy for her reporting on the city attorney's race in Seattle. And Scott, before we wrap, I'm wondering what you think about the bigger political implications of this race. I mean, Seattle bucked the trend in 2021 by electing Davison in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That was around the time that other big blue cities were elevating progressive prosecutors. You had Kim Foxx in Cook County, Illinois, George Gascon in L.A., Larry Krasner in Philly. A lot of these names sort of leading this anti-carceral kind of reformist movement. But then came a backlash with a lot of voters during the pandemic when crime rates had spiked and several cities and counties were ousting these reformer prosecutors either through recalls or just, they were losing re-election. So does this election have any relevance on those broader currents, this Ann Davison re-election campaign? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, if nothing else, 2021 in Seattle showed that even the most liberal cities did have their limits. Like Seattle, voters didn't go for a police abolitionist as their city attorney. Voters there found that to be scarier than even a Republican.
Yeah. I think it's so important. We talk about trends. It's so important to remember a race is won or lost by a candidate, right? In the end, I think that abolitionist candidate also did things back in 2021.
Nicole Thomas Kennedy. Yeah.
Yeah. She did things to, kind of make sure that she couldn't win, I think. And I do think when we look at trends, what I'm going to be looking at, because we're in a different era now, we are in the second Trump era as opposed to the Biden pandemic times. What I think a lot of progressives are going to be watching this summer and fall is how far does the pendulum swing back around here? Are Democrats going to go full New York Zohran Mamdani, or will what some Democrats love to call pragmatic progressivism win the day? Will it be more, moderate Democrats? Probably not. But I think a lot of folks are paying attention, especially next month during primary. They're going to say, what are those vote totals for the progressives in the race? Not just in this one, but even in the King County executive, the mayor's race in Seattle, lots of other state ledge races that we've talked about on this show. So it'll be interesting to watch that.
Now I'm trying to make the New York comparison work, and I'm thinking, who's the Eric Adams of Seattle politics? I don't think that guy has any comparison.
He doesn't. Yeah, there's no one quite like Eric Adams. Thank God, maybe.
Turkish Airlines is sad.
Oh.
Thanks for listening to Sound Politics this week. Our editor is Catherine Smith. Hans Anderson produces the show. I'm Libby Dankman.
And I'm Scott Greenstone, and we are only able to make this show because of your support. Every day I walk around the halls of KUOW and people ask me, why do so many people donate to your podcast? And I say, Sound Politics listeners, they're special. They're a different breed.
Head and shoulders. They are the best.
So join those, breathe that rarefied air, join those ranks today, and donate in the show notes at kuow.org/politics.
See you next week, everybody.